Welcome to the World Lens podcast, where each week we look at news from around the world through a global business lens. I'm your host, Michelle Evans, digital specialist at the World Trade Center Institute. Today, we're looking at our neighbors to the south. Mexico just recently had a major presidential election, and the winner is Claudia Sheinbaum, a former head of government of Mexico City, a scientist, and an academic. She's the first woman to be elected president of Mexico and a member of the left-wing political party Morena. So, Bruce, what do you know about Miss Claudia Sheinbaum? Are there any other accolades from her long and prestigious history that I missed?
Yeah, actually, I'm actually more familiar with her as a fellow physicist. She
Mm,
has a doctorate from Berkeley, so that's cool. She had done a lot of work in like energy engineering in the late '90s, but more recently in climate as a climate scientist, and was part of
right.
a team that won the Nobel
Nobel
Prize
Prize, yeah.
in 2007. So I think the other thing is that about, I was reading up a little bit more about her that it's notable that she's Jewish. Her
I know, right?
grandparents, yeah, came to Mexico after from the Holocaust as survivors. And so that was all interesting. But I had to study up a bit on her political career because, she was more in like Mexico City politics, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, it said that she had gotten interested in activism and politics in college in the 2000. Then, of course, the environmental secretary was where she started at Mexico City,
Mm-hmm.
and formed the relationship that was what got her here today with Obrador, the president at the past president now. Or so anyway, so yeah, so a pretty interesting woman, and I think as we'll talk hopefully later about how I think some of this is going to form her thinking and actions.
So she'll replace the current president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, or AMLO, who has been president of Mexico since 2018. So they're
Mhm.
both members of the same Moreno party. Does this signal continuity for the policies that implemented since 2018?
I would say, in general, I would say yes. Definitely out the gate until she gets settled in. We'll talk a little bit more about that. I love how Obrador goes by these initials, right? AMLO, AMLO, just like we do, JFK
JFK.
or FDR, that kind of thing. So I think notable is he would still be the president of Mexico if the Constitution allowed it, and
Right.
President, now elect Scheinbaum was hand selected by him, so
Hmm.
he's expecting her to follow his lead, right?
Right.
And and where I deviate from that, and as I think about her background and the fact that she's known for like basing her programs and decision on data and facts, right?
Right.
Yeah, so this would be a departure from AMLO,
Yeah, he's not the same.
because he used to just ignore that and really had the party line, right? So
Hmm.
I think that in time, that she's going to stay the course, but slowly imprint her, fact-based decisions,
Hmm.
and we'll see how that plays out. Yeah.
So, what does a new president in Mexico mean for our relationship with them, and in particular, like the U.S. Mexico border? Are there any expected changes before we go to the polls in November?
It's a short run to November.
Yeah.
So I would hope, that the relationship with the U.S. would be even stronger under President Steinbaum. She's fluent in English. She spent
Yeah.
significant time in the U.S. studying, at Berkeley. So she's got that, at least like cultural awareness in a
Hmm.
much deeper way. Obviously, she was strong in security. That was one of her profiles in Mexico City. And so I'm sure that she's going to be approached by the Biden team, and you know, and to see what conversations they can have. But anything that she would say or do is just words, right? There's not going to be any actions.
Right.
Hopefully they'll get some, and we have had through Obrador, positive support from Mexico around migrants that are coming through Mexico, and now we're going to be returning a lot of them, right, with the
Yeah,
recent
Biden
changes.
just,
Yep.
yeah, which is
So yeah, so I
crazy.
would say would hope it would be better. That's the short
Yeah.
answer.
So this was a major election for Mexico with more than 20,000 positions across the country up for grabs. But this election was also marked by violence, with one report suggesting 28 candidates were attacked with 16 killed. Why is this so contentious right now?
When I was looking at stuff, I thought the tally was like 37 candidates were
Mm,
assassinated. So maybe it's evolved since you looked at it. But regardless, the cartels and crime are probably or are definitely the biggest issue for Mexico and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. And while she has this track record of improving security in Mexico, which was largely around, um, paying police more so that they're less likely to be influenced by cartel
the
money and
cartel.
those kinds of
Hmm.
things. But is she going to be able to scale that, at a national, scale? I would say, remains to be seen. Yeah.
Hmm. It seems like most of this violence, though, is targeted towards local candidates. Like, what
hmm
kinds of power do these local candidates hold that they're being targeted in this way? Would this be the equivalent of someone attacking, like, a mayor?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I would say, and some of these towns might have 10,000 people, right? So they're
Hmm.
very small, kind of like, you know, electoral districts. You know, the cartels rule at the local level, right? And
Hmm.
so, they want influence over these government officials. They don't want to be, impeded by them, right? So, in 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 some of these rural areas, only the cartel favored candidate even runs because the
Everyone
other
else is
people
too
don't want to
scared.
get killed, right?
Yeah.
So if you're the cartels or you're organized crime and you can divvy up Mexico and control how these locales are run and operated as far as policing and that's what they want and basically through fear and obviously assassination rule with the iron fist.
So this is pretty typical for like a Mexican election because I saw in one of the articles that I was reading that they have like some sort of protection application that you can apply for candidates who are running for office to get protection in the event that something like this happens. So they're used to it. It's almost normal.
Yeah, so elections and violence, I would say, have gone hand in hand in Mexico through much of the entire 20th century. So this
Hmm.
is not like something that's more recent. This is like ingrained in their culture, right? And these, I'm going to call them criminal groups. They've taken over, large parts of Mexico. They, like I said, they fight for territory. They, the trafficking, the people trafficking. These are all very lucrative things that happen. But it's not just these dynamics that are largely a pull or a push from the U.S., but also it's internal, um you know disappearing and extortion and all of that. So so they make money on the backs of Mexican citizens, not just the
Hmm.
drug and human trafficking, right? So
Right.
it's it is always been there. It's definitely gotten worse, obviously,
Yeah.
and that's why I come back to saying this is probably the number one challenge that she has taking the reins, right?
Yeah, let's get back to Scheinbaum.
Okay.
One article referred to her as a leftist. Is that the same as an American leftist?
So yeah, okay. So I went to the I'm gonna here. So I went to the Morena party site and said, well, how do they describe themselves, right? So
Right.
they're a left democratic left wing party that supports ethnic, religious, cultural, and sexual diversity and respect for human rights and environmental care.
So very similar to an American leftist.
Well, I'm not going to say leftist. I'm going to say that sounds like being a liberal or progressive in the U.S., right?
Mm-hmm.
But the other side of this coin is they are also have opposition to kind of the neoliberal economic policies that Mexico began adopting back in the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, well, neoliberal economic policies, what does that sound like? So neoliberal economics focuses on privatization of the public sphere, right? So taking, governmental public entities and turning them private,
Mm-hmm.
deregulation of the corporate sector, lowering of income and corporate taxes paid with cuts from public spending. So when you start reading about
Mm-hmm.
neoliberal, it sure sounds like a conservative in the US, right?
Yeah.
So leftist in Mexico in Morena is like progressive but conservative.
Hmm.
That's how I would, you know,
Interesting.
yeah, so it's not just an easy match.
Huh. So she has 4 months before she enters office.
Mhm.
During that time, the current president said that he wants to push through some constitutional changes, like
Mm.
eliminating independent oversight of regulatory changes. Seems like a pretty big deal to happen after an election, right?
Absolutely. And this is actually the prior to the whole election thing, what was on my radar from a business perspective, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But back in February, he tried to ram through, and he's done this consistently. He'll just drop things and expect his majority to just vote and not even read it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's running him into some headaches with their Supreme Court. But back in February, these like package of constitutional amendments and legal reform initiatives and everything. He needed 2/3 majority to push them through, which he doesn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And based on these primary election results, but he will overlap with these new lawmakers in that final month, September. So everyone is nervous now that while those things were held off, that he'll have a 1 month window to jam this stuff through,
Mm.
right? And so that is big. And if you sat back and said, what happened to the Mexican stock market and the peso,
Right.
taking that ditch? This is it, because business and the market and everyone's going, uh-oh.
Mm-hmm.
This could have major ramifications if he's able to push these things through. So
Especially
that's
for
what's
foreign
going on.
investors.
Hmm?
I say, especially for foreign
Oh,
investors.
yeah, it's well, yeah, but definitely for how things function in Mexico, these will have
Mm-hmm.
lasting impacts, and getting them. She's not going to like waltz in and like turn all these over, right? So yeah.
So we mentioned this before, like one big issue was the challenge of dealing with the drug cartels. So basically, regardless of who's president, this is going to be an issue. Do you have any thoughts on whether the new administration will be like tackling things any differently? Because I remember reading something that Obrador was more like, let's fight them without using guns. Like, let's take a more peaceful approach.
Yeah, that and like she did in Mexico with changing
Mm-hmm.
their stature and pay and all those kinds of things. So there's no questions, as we've talked before. The cartels wield tremendous power,
Yeah.
in Mexico, and as the number of candidate assassinations, whether it's 16 or 30 plus, organized crime through that process controls, at the local level, most of Mexico. So uh, my for her coming in, she's got a lot on her plate. I think she's going to just continue her predecessor, right, Obrador,
Mm-hmm.
his kind of hands-off approach to cartels. I don't think she needs a big fight right now.
Yeah.
And then as she does, mature in office, I think she will try some of these, kind of organic changes to try to get the national police force and local police and start just chipping away at it. But I don't see a huge fight ahead. So
Mm-hmm.
with the cartels.
So, Bruce, you ready for your crystal ball? So, do you see any significant changes in the US Mexico relationship based on this new president? Especially, might I add that President Biden just kind of revoked the asylum uh,
Hmm.
for Mexican immigrants. So, what are you seeing in that crystal ball?
Sure. And I actually, money matters,
Yeah.
there are huge dynamics right now in Mexico. So I do see significant changes in the U.S. Mexico relationship. I see it based on the rapid increase in investors turning to Mexico and moving. This is that whole kind of decoupling from China and the nearshoring, right? And putting more
Mm-hmm.
and more production in Mexico. And with that, and we talked about on a prior episode, right? They're now the number one exporter to the US,
Yeah.
right? So that is huge. You've got external financial pressure, you have trade pressure, you have all of that now. Investors are not going to want their supply chains and earnings impacted by the cartels and criminal gangs,
Right.
right? Extorting and diverting and all of these. So I do think there's going to be change, that the U.S. and these investors that are investing in Mexico are not going to sit by idly and let this happen. So it's an open question. Mexico, they call it the moment of promise and opportunity, right? With all of
Mm-hmm.
this nearshoring and job and wealth creation. So, are they going to meet it? Are they going to squander it and caving to criminals and corruption? And I will hope that it won't happen, because if they do, then all of that is going to waste away, right? People are going to pull out of
Yeah.
Mexico and move their investments elsewhere, you know, wherever that may be, Canada or or closer to the U.S. but not direct, land link like we have with Mexico. So I would say the the changes will be there. Immigration, you mentioned, is going to still, continue to be a major issue between the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And Mexico. And I think she'll continue. She's going to want to protect Mexican sovereignty, right, and not
Mm-hmm.
allow U.S. military forces to come into Mexico and start bombing the cartels or whatever.
Right.
And they want to generate goodwill with the administration. So it's going to be that whole dance going on, but the stakes are high and will be getting increasingly higher as she comes into office in our relationship. And I think we will see changes.
We sure will. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today. And of course, thank you so much for tuning in. Please visit the World Trade Center Institute online at WTCI.org for more insights, events, and opportunities. And make sure to follow us on all social channels at WTC Institute. See you next week.